an céadróis Seanad ó Donnghaile tá ceann ó méadí go.
Minister, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're very busy, so I do appreciate you coming in to the Chamber and taking the time to address the issue that I've sought to raise. And the reason I did submit this particular commencement matter, Minister, was off the back of last week's Good Friday Agreement Committee here, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement. We heard from Misters Peter Bunting and Conal McFeely of the Independent Assessment Team, who again highlighted Tony Taylor's case and their general frustrations at the issue not getting the public attention it deserves. So I think it's important, given that it is now over 2 years from Tony Taylor's arrest and subsequent imprisonment, and indeed it's our view that his continued detention is wrong and a violation of his human rights. We've consistently stated that if there is indeed evidence against Mr Taylor, that should be presented to him and his legal case, his legal team in open court. I would contest that it is the most basic right of anyone who finds themselves in prison, particularly for such a prolonged period, that they have the opportunity to address and indeed challenge any evidence or case if such exists. The problem here is we're essentially, Minister, as you will well know, being asked to put our trust and our faith in faceless, secret British intelligence agencies and services. The same people who refused to release files on the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, the same people that tell us that there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. These are all very obscure and I would contest not exactly the most trustworthy of outlets. So therefore it is appropriate that if there is evidence there, it wouldn't be kept hidden. It would be put before Mr Taylor in court. So over the course of the past 2 years, the British Government has failed to produce any evidence which could in any way justify Tony's continued detention. So we have to appreciate and remember too the strain that this has placed on Tony's wife, his family and indeed his parents by his continued detention. And they have outlined that stress and that strain very publicly, which I think has shifted not only this case from the sphere or the domain of the political, which in itself causes much and warrants much concern, but has subsequently placed it into the issue of humanitarian and human rights sphere as well. So, Minister, again, I appreciate your attendance today, and the reason I was moved to submit this commencement matter is because of the frustration, not least from very reputable and eminent figures like Peter Bunting and Conal McFeely, who are hugely frustrated at the lack of publicity or the lack of focus or the lack of attention that this particular Irish citizen and his case is getting. And hopefully through you we can lift their frustrations and indeed lift the case of Tony Taylor into a warranted public space where we can challenge the very real concerns, both political and legal, that exist regarding his ongoing detention on his case. So,
thank you, Hirlach, and I'm grateful to Senator O'Donnell for raising this important matter. I had the opportunity last week, Senator, to brief the Dáil on my engagement in the Mr Taylor case. I want to assure this House that my officials have been engaged on this matter on an ongoing basis. The background to the Tony Taylor case is that he is from Derry and was in recent years a member of a dissident Republican group. In 1994, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison after he was seriously injured in a premature explosion in Derry. He was released under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. He served a further 3-year sentence from 2011 to 2014 for possession of a rifle. In March 2016, he was returned to prison after his early release licence was suspended by the then Secretary of State, Theresa Villiers. Mr Taylor's case has been discussed regularly with the Northern Ireland office through my officials at the Belfast Secretariat. My officials have also made visits to Mr Taylor in Maghaberry Prison on 2 occasions, the most recent in the last few weeks. I have written to the Secretary of State, Karen Bradley, on the case, and I spoke with her on the matter when we met in London last Thursday. the Northern Ireland Parole Commissioners held a parole hearing on Tony Taylor's revocation of licence in May of last year. The decision of the Parole Commissioners at the time was to continue the revocation of licence. A further review by the Parole Commissioners is underway, and there has been an expectation that this would be concluded in the coming weeks. However, we understand from discussions with the Northern Ireland Office and with Mr Taylor's legal representatives that there may now be some delay in that process. That is clearly not ideal, and we have urged that every effort be made to avoid unnecessary delays. I am aware that Mr Taylor has publicly renounced any future engagement in dissident Republican activity. That is to be welcomed, as there is no future on this island for political ends to be pursued through violence or the threat of violence. I have also received a letter from Mr Taylor's wife, Lorraine, and I am aware of their difficult family circumstances. I am also aware, as Senator Donnghaile has indicated, that there is considerable concern in Northern Ireland across the broad nationalist and Republican community about the basis and nature of Mr Taylor's ongoing detention. These have all been reflected in our ongoing engagement with the Northern Ireland Office on this matter. The recent indications that Mr Taylor's new parole hearing may take longer than expected is of particular concern, as he has now been back in detention for over 2 years without being charged or convicted of any offences. I want to assure senators that I and my officials will continue to actively monitor developments in the case and will continue to raise the case with the Northern Ireland Office, including, as necessary, the Secretary of State.
Thank you. Very briefly,
Look, I appreciate the update from the Minister, and indeed also appreciate and acknowledge the work that he and his officials are doing in regard to this case. But I would say, Tánaiste, that the concerns around this case, while predominantly emanating from within the Nationalist and Republican constituency, they go much broader than that. They permeate throughout humanitarian and legal organisations and indeed the legal profession, given what we are effectively seeing here is internment via detention, internment via remand, I should say. So that obviously warrants much concern, and I appreciate that the Tánaiste Cathaoirleach has outlined that his officials are keeping a watching brief on this. I think that will be welcomed by those of us, all of us, who have an interest in this case, both inside these houses and indeed outside of it. I share the Minister's concern around the recent indications of a delay, whether that's intentional or otherwise. But I would, while I have the opportunity, Tánaiste, ask you, firstly, if you find this satisfactory, and indeed what measures you think you can go to go above and beyond simply monitoring within the confines that you find yourself in. I don't seek you to step outside of that, but I do believe, given the severity of this case, I was actually reminded on my way down to Dublin this morning that the average period of internment for those interned between 1971 and 75 was 2 years. Tony Taylor now finds himself held in prison without any evidence being produced or put to him or his legal team longer than that. So, Gura Maigat, Cathaoirleach, and again, Minister, I do appreciate you taking the time to come in.
Yeah, Senator, I mean, I think it is probably important to put this case in context as well, and I think in this debate it is appropriate for us to again call on all dissident Republican groups that have not yet done so to renounce violence and to commit to exclusively democratic means in terms of pursuit of their political aims. I also want to pay tribute to Garda Síochána for the ongoing work that they continue to do to deal with the threat posed by dissident Republican groups. In relation to Tony Taylor's case, the dissident Republican group that he was connected to have made clear statements in terms of renouncing violence, and I welcome that. I don't know whether or not there is information that's held in relation to Tony Taylor that can justify him being in prison. I simply don't know that. But we have raised our concerns in relation to this case. The holding of somebody without publicly producing evidence against them is something that has raised real concerns. I've witnessed that myself in Derry, speaking to people. And so I have raised it directly with the Secretary of State, and I suspect I'll be talking to her again this week. So there is a process here under consideration with the parole commissioners, and I think that's the appropriate process to make any decisions in relation to this case, and I hope that we can ensure that decisions can be made without any further delay.
Thank you. Next one is Senator O'Riordan.